Hello, my name is Gabriel Dotson, and today I will be presenting my final exam for sociology that is due on May 12th. To begin with, and so my social problem I chose for my PowerPoint is the internet. And so the main argument deriving from this article given in the PowerPoint essentially states that the internet has altered the method that which people became able to obtain and retain information. The very way how humans treat literacy online compared to physical literature, meaning that the way how people treat reading a book from a computer monitor to reading a book from paperback cover actually differences, and these three bullet point reasons where if you were to actually use online literacy, people will have a harder time to maintain concentration and attention spans for longer periods of text in on a monitor screen compared to if you're reading a book. Another one would be basically memory retention, able to remember what you have just read because of using an online monitor to basically read the same information set given if you were given from a paper book. And a third one, which is pretty more abstract, but the neurological effects that using a monitor online would impact someone and their ability to basically have a cognitive ability to adapt to what they're using. And so, in the sense that if you use a book, you will be better adapt to reading a book, where if you use using a monitor, you'll be better adapt to reading things through a monitor. And so, quite literally, it says that the internet affects your ability, or not your ability, but essentially your brain on these certain aspects of using them. So, to better understand the topic we're talking about with the internet, we're going to go a quick history dive around it, and essentially going back in the 1960s, where the internet was actually used for military defense, essentially providing a more faster, informative, and less encrypted way of communicating compared to the telegram back then, to better provide information for base to base to just need to know what they need to know. And so in the 1990s, that's when it became from military operations to the public will know, which is the creation of the World Wide Web becoming access for the public for people to basically make websites of what information they feel in their heart's content to fill out with. And so as time progresses in 2004, that's when social media comes in, where it comes from communicating using articles and websites to a broad audience and now communicating more intimately between one-on-one people, discussing more in earth and more grounded and more personal, ideas and emotions between one person to another. And so in 2010, that's when we start involving AI. And so with the existence of AI, artificial intelligence, suggesting that the internet is this constant evolution, this constant advancements to itself, meaning that there can be a lot of things we can look at and potentially see, is this really good for society? Is this good for myself? Is this good for people? And so it's still an ongoing thing that we do need to be understanding of what it could do potentially, whether the consequences are good or bad. And so looking at it with the sociological imagination, there are two ways we need to look at this regarding to the internet and how it affects people. Starting with individually, a person who is using the internet will have these certain aspects of them that will be affected, primarily adaptive learning, in which if they're going into a new entire environment where there's a lot of things that they need to adapt to better their situation or position in the online world, they will need to adapt accordingly to achieve. And in doing so, it stems to communication, since you will be striving to find a wide range of people with different languages, different ways of communication, and different aspects of communicating via social media. And so, with all this influx of people adaptively living and talking, there will be this information gathering, inserting that people will have this such influx of information. Well, they will need to find a way to adequately organize it, or have it memorized, or make sure that it's validated enough for that they can be worth a listen to. And so societal effects would concur to an individual to how a group of people will practice, which is changing communication, meaning that people will differently communicate using different forms of technology or different forms of communicating, like texting, emojis, ways to convey a message, and not through the common ways of verbal speech, how we do it typically as people. And so with that also goes as well as the same thing with instant information. With this surplus of information, you are going to be overloaded, overwhelmed, and overfluxed with all of this information that people need to deal with on the daily, which leads to shifting global trends, which is it's a common thing that people will follow accordingly, just to follow like a herd mentality to see what's the biggest thing happening across the web, essentially. And so going over the pros and cons of the argument for and against the social problem of the internet and the arguments given over, con number one states that all new technologies, the internet included, have been feared. And going over Bonnie's site, which the citation is in the very end of the PowerPoint, essentially states that with the older and newer generation, elders and youth, essentially each generation developed differently because of this fear-driven vendetta that the elderly had against using the internet. And so the youth growing up with it have essentially developed this different consequence of having attention fragmentation, identity shaping of themselves online. Whereas the elderly have this ability or lack of ability to actually interpret misinformation and being exposed and unable to understand what's from fact and fiction, which also leads to misplacing their trust into online entities, meaning that the trope of elderly people being scammed by the Prince of Egypt is actually a real scenario because of the lack and the fear that has driven them to avoid this online atmosphere and thus not fully understand its capabilities for both good and bad. And so con number two states that the internet is a gift to diverse and challenged populations needing equal access to information. And so with this article I chose for by Firth, his citations at the end of the PowerPoint, essentially saying that with standardized testing like ACTs and SATs, basically actually have a diversion in class when it comes to economical status, where typically wealthy students are more inclined to pass because they have economic benefit of obtaining resources to better prepare for these tests, whereas those who are more impoverished tend to don't because they don't have the same qualities that a more wealthy family would typically have for resources. And so with the internet inclined, meaning that they will have equal access to information so that they can know and prepare for these tests regardless of economic wealth, or in fact even cheaper, right? If you get the same questions and have the same material practice, regardless if you have it from a tutor or from a computer, it still allows readiness. It still allows the same information spilled out for those who need to prepare, which is both sides of the class, the impoverished and the rich. Is as long as the information is gathered and spread throughout on equal terms to allow this information, so that equal preparedness will be allowed to those regardless of class. It would benefit those who are more impoverished than those who are wealthy on the sole socioeconomical class of wealth. Con number three: changing how the brain works and how we access and process information is not necessarily bad. Brought in the argument by Briggs in his article, which is cited in the end of the PowerPoint, essentially saying that there are six effects that happens to the human brain or to people in general when they do use the internet, because as the natural world and how people adapt to the natural world, people adapt to the online world. And so with these adaptations comes with with as well as the consequences of using the internet. And so six of them, three of them, starting with shortened attention span, essentially saying that people have adapted the ability to essentially skim through long texts in a very fast manner to essentially only adopt what they need. Increased task switching, essentially telling or essentially people have adopted the ability to able to switch from one task to another in a very fast-paced manner, meaning that they can drop whatever and go straight on without and little to no uh, issue among the process. And outsourcing memory. Outsourcing memory is not the same Or it is the same as if you're asking for a friend for information or a book to how to do this task, as much as going to the computer and typing what you should do to do with this task. It's essentially the same thing as people has been doing beforehand. And so it makes no difference when you're having a source that tells you essentially anything that you want to know. So that kind of excludes the necessity of just remembering if you can ask someone that knows already, and that someone being a computer. And so with the other three, dopamine addiction like behavior, sleep disruption, reduced deep thinking, they're all aspects of the hyper pace and the hyper fast environment that the internet is, meaning that you're going through loads of information in a very fast pace, in a very flashy and addictive manner that it's going to affect people on what they want or they're going to want to see online. It affect people in their sleep when their brains are actively working, even in the late hours, and as well as reshuffling their mind to essentially unable to allow them to have these deeper thoughts because it's just reshuffling through new information that they need to, digest for the time being when it's necessary, and then just forget and replace with something else that is more necessary than now. And so, heading with the pro arguments going for the argument of the social problem, the speed of the internet is different from the previous breakthrough technologies and is reprogramming our brains for the worst. An article done by Third, citations at the end of the PowerPoint, essentially stating the obvious, as stated from all the other articles, that there are obvious effects of using the internet. In his article, stating that the attention is more distracted, memory is being outsourced, and social thinking is changing. Natural occurrences when it comes to adapting to using the internet. But what he also mentions is that online interaction affects how people view themselves and others, shaping their identity and social behavior, in which it creates neuroplasticity, essentially saying that the brain physically changes based on the internet, and these habits can be long term. And with that, the internet can essentially reshape someone's brain, and so that can affect a whole lot of cognitive thinking as well as processing, understanding, remembering. And so what's also really key importance is that the age. The younger you are, the more likely your brain is able to mold into adapting to using the internet. And so typically the younger you are, the more effective and the more permanent these effects could be, in which it could be for the worst as they can be, depending on the individual, depending on their interaction with the internet, and depending how you know how more significant it is to the individual. Pro 2 in favor of the social problem for the internet, stating that IQ scores have been falling for decades, considering to the rise of technologies, including the internet. And so, with the article done by the author and the slide citation at the end of the PowerPoint, but there is this term called the Flynn effect, where it essentially states that every generation actually increases in IQ because of the increase of advancement in education. Whereas in the article states that there's actually have been a slowing to a complete decrease in IQ, as such, suggesting that there are specific environmental factors listing that there's been changing in education systems, meaning that there's been a complete reamp of how the public education primarily, has been affiliating towards the IQ, to the decreasing IQ levels because of how it is unable to adapt to the modern standards of what people need to actually educate themselves, as well as another one being, which is typically of public education, being less emphasis on critical thinking, essentially impairing more on remembering than critically analyzing and comparing to what you're doing with this information. And so it installs you the idea that you just need to remember and not to understand what you're given. And so what now includes the internet is the increased screen time in digital media, essentially saying that how the internet is being used in a sense for example entertainment factors like social media, video games, videos, all those aspects are distracting as well as inflicting on the studies that, or not the studies, but the potential of those in the school setting to essentially perform well because of the time they're using to essentially entertain themselves not being properly allocated to actually preparing themselves uh, for schooling and actually understanding and bettering their education through the means of the school when the technology they have is inhibiting them because of what is on there is distracting them. And many other environmental factors that's happening within homes, so to say. So to say. And so pro number three in favor of the online or the social problem that the internet is is that the internet is causing us to lose the ability to perform simple tasks. And so in the article done by the author in the slide, his citations at the end of the PowerPoint essentially says that the younger generations are more reliant on technology from how much more effective and convenient it is to obtain food using it. And so with the emergence of online giving you essentially opportunity to cut down on wasting time to cook food when using it online for XYZ, but primarily for using them for jobs, as of now today, kind of cuts the effect that since that there are food delivery apps that can deliver food to your doorsteps, meal kits that can be dropped off once a month, to be into your doorstep, the same thing as a food delivery app, or using online recipes or videos to essentially imitate what has been done in the video, and convenience foods where you can just buy something prepackaged from the store like chips or candy and just eat it right then and there. And that is because the way that the internet has affected our lifestyles had essentially made the necessity of cooking in reliant, because the internet only forces you to be more engaged with it to the point where you cannot develop any other skills in which you rely on the internet to now have what you naturally need, which would be food. And likewise could be said for water. And so it kind of negates the ability for you to, instead of essentially cooking for yourself and having a meal ready for yourself, you need to rely on the internet to now be able to eat, which is a really simple skill, but now it is being traded in for more time for the internet at the expense of more fastly food for more time to be spending online, and which it in a way it subjects us to having less skills, less on hand skills than we do typically with the computer. And so that is what using the internet is doing to us. And so my perspective over the problem of the internet is that it's a tool, right? The tool can be used for good or for bad, and it entirely depends on how people are using it and how healthily are they using it. When it comes to how much time they're using it, what time they're there to use it, or what they're using it for altogether. And for me personally, I take a stand for I would take a stand for against the social problem, because the internet does affect cognitively what you typically think, but then again, it's as if it's an ever changing atmosphere, it's ever changing environment that people need to adapt to. It's like getting a job, a specific job from college, right? You're taking 4 years of your time to get this bachelor's degree to curate yourself to this specific job. And so likewise, how you can say our monkey ancestors curated their lives into living into whatever atmosphere they're in, same way as for people nowadays curating their lives into adapting to the internet world, where all of this is just people adapting to what the internet is, which is just another environment, entirely different environment that you get to choose towards the end of what you how will you be affected by it, and how will you put an effect in it. And so why I choose the social issue is because it's a concept that is worldwide, right? World Wide Web, people use it everywhere. And so obviously if people are using it all over the place, then it's something that's significant to everyone. And why does it matter to society? Because everyone's using it. Everyone is subconscious to being afflicted by it, you know, to being with it, because how our world is so profound on using the web and communication, and it's so key to how we have a standing in this world nowadays that everyone uses it, even society encourages you to use it, which is about as it says and goes. And why should we care about it? And it's because the internet is such a wild ground as of right now, that there has to be obviously sides to how it is seen, right? It can be used for the good, it can be used for the bad, it can be used for however you want it, but it needs to be viewed in the point where it's not too set to be, negative or positive, because everything has a gray area, and we need to understand that, everything has a shadow and everything has a light to it. And so if we can understand both sides of the same coin, then it's, we can always benefit ourselves just from knowing what we need to.